Hi, thanks for tuning into this clip, Stress, Trauma, and Our Nervous System. My name's Ed Sipler, and I work for the Southeastern Health and Social Care Trust in our Health Development and Adult Addiction Services. Now, we made this clip in partnership with ASCERT, a charity in Lisburn here in Northern Ireland, because we really thought it would be helpful for a lot of people out there. Now, why are you looking at this clip? What brought you to it? Well, maybe you saw the title and you were curious. Maybe stress and things in your background have built up on you, and you thought maybe, yeah, this could be helpful. Maybe your mood's low or you're anxious about things, and you thought, okay, this could be helpful. Maybe you've reached out for support and you were told, okay, a bit of a waiting list, and while you're waiting, this could help. Good. Whatever brought you to watch this clip, we're pleased you're here, and we really do hope you get something from it. Now, we all experience stress at some level. Now, daily stresses, those things that happen every day, traffic, family, juggling things, they're common for everyone. But also, a lot of us have longer term, stress, like caring for an aging family member with a long-term condition, financial pressures, dealing with loss. And often, well, we do have the capacity and support to cope with things that hit us. But then some of us have had some really harsh things that have happened in our past. And stress seems to hit us that little bit harder. And then to add to this, well, what added stress is 2 years of COVID, brought to us all. So, some important things to say about this. Where have I got this material? I've been using this resource for people for a good few years now, Stress, Trauma, and Your Brain. Now, I got the material because we had a psychotherapist and trainer come to Northern Ireland talking to us about stress and trauma, Zoe Logwick, and I thought what she was talking about was really helpful. So with Zoe's permission, I took what she was talking about and put it into a resource. That's pretty much what I'm going to talk about today in this clip. Now, you can download that clip if you look at the information on the YouTube site. You can download it, or you can go to ASCERT's website, ASCERT, www.assert.biz, on their resources section, and there it is. Now, some important things to say. This is by no means a complete discussion about stress and trauma in the brain, and also, really important, it's not a quick fix, and it's not a replacement for professional help. If you feel you need that, it's important you reach out for it. But it is aimed to have that conversation about how stress and trauma affects us all, and most important, ideas for healing. But the important thing to say right from the very beginning, you take what you think is going to be helpful for you. Okay, well, what does stress and trauma mean? Well, stress can be defined as those adverse reactions that when we have excessive pressure. Now, a little bit of stress can be good, it mobilizes us, but excessive stress, when it builds up, well, that can put our well-being at risk. Now, types of stress, we have general stress, those everyday things that happen, but they can build up, they can be cumulative, they build up on top of each other. We can often have a critical incident, something short, sharp happens. That could be a car crash, a medical procedure, something a lot more, immediate. And often we have long-term stresses, things that are there in our lives for a long period of time. And we can also have post-traumatic stress. Something very short, sharp happens, and it has a lingering effect. Now, some of those general stresses, and even sometimes when they're cumulative, they can be positive. We'll feel the effects of them physically, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but our heart will be faster, stress hormones will pump, and it gets us mobilized. If they're more, long-term, if they build up cumulative, if they build up, well, maybe we see them as tolerable. We put up with them. They're serious, and we might have, temporary stress, but they can be buffered by the supports we have. Toxic stress, that's when they're prolonged, and we have those stress hormones that do affect us, quite a lot, and we don't have an outlet for it. That's when it becomes toxic. So Trauma, what does trauma mean? Now, trauma comes from the Greek word meaning a wound. Now, for some people, trauma can harden you psychologically and it can interfere with how you develop. And there's been lots of really good thinkers that have come over to Northern Ireland that talk to us about their work. Gabor Mate, Peter Levine, Bruce Perry, Dan Siegel, Stephen Porges, and a host of others. And we've learned a lot from those folks. Now, we could have acute trauma, a single sharp, thing that we normally associate with trauma, something violent, something, quite sharp. That could be, like I said, a medical procedure. It could be an accident. It could be some form of violence or abuse. Now, chronic trauma, that's repeated and prolonged. Now, those big things we expect to see here, those violence, accidents, abuse, well, let's call them the big T's. They do happen. But also, what could be chronic trauma are those interactions that make people feel inferior, insecure, insignificant, and they just build up and they wear us down. Let's call them the little T's. The little T's can be as toxic as the big T's. And complex trauma, that's when we're exposed to multiple traumatic events. And Northern Ireland has had its set of problems, and there's been a legacy of that. So some important things to say about trauma. Not everybody experiences trauma in the same way. Now, trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of that. Now, the three parts of trauma, let's think of the three E's. The event or circumstances that we would call a wound. But that's not all of it. There's more. The experience, what that person experiences, that's going to determine whether it's traumatic or not, or how well the person works through that. And then the effects of trauma without support can have an adverse result, an adverse impact on our physical, social, emotional, and spiritual consequences. Now, Helen Keller said an important thing, and when I heard it, I thought, yeah, I'd like that as comment. The world is full of suffering, but it's also full of overcoming it. So to try to understand that, let's take a look at how stress and trauma affects our brain and our nervous system. Now, this could be pretty complex, and I hope we can put it simple for you. Our brains are remarkable. They've evolved over how many thousands of years to help us survive from sometimes pretty harsh conditions. Now, even though our brains evolved to deal with those threats, well, in today's world, it can still work that way. Now, what happens when you experience something stressful, you feel threatened? You're going to get stress hormones released. And what's going to happen in all our bodies? Our heart's going to beat a bit faster. Our blood pressure will rise. Our breathing becomes rapid and shallow. Oxygen will go to the muscles to get ready to mobilize, to deal with it. And your liver, well, that's going to pump sugar into your body, get you ready for action, give you energy. Now, the parts of the brain that are affected. Now, this is pretty complicated. Do you need to know the names of the brains? Well, I'm going to give you a simpler way to understand this, but let's just go through them. And do you need to know these? Well, some people may want to. Don't get bogged down on it. The brainstem, well, that's where that's going to control our life functions, and that's our heart rate, our breathing. Now, the limbic system, that's that emotional part of the brain, and that's going to play a key role to how we respond to stress. The amygdala, well, that's in the middle of the brain, and that's like a smoke detector for danger. That will filter for danger. The hypothalamus, well, that hears that smoke alarm and communicates that to the rest of the body. The hippocampus, well, that's going to involve our memory and help us apply the context and to regulate the amygdala. And the cortex or neocortex, well, that's a thinking part of the brain. So I'm going to give you a little simpler description of that, so help us all understand that a bit better. Well, what does a high level of stress do to anyone? Well, our senses, what we experience is a constant flow of information, and we're taking that in. And the thalamus relays that information from your senses. Now it relays it to the amygdala, and that's going to be your alarm system. That filters for danger. If it does, that's going to produce stress hormones. The thinking part of our brain goes offline, and that emotional brain activates, and you hear this term a lot, that fight or flight response. Now, those stress hormones, three major ones: adrenaline, that's going to increase sugar in your blood. That's going to raise your heart rate, raises your blood pressure. It gives you a surge of energy. Cortisol, well, that's going to change how the body responds to stress. It's going to, including your blood sugar levels and your glucose levels. And it's also going to draw blood and oxygen from different parts of the body to your muscles to get mobilized. And norepinephrine, well, that's going to make you feel more alert and awake and focused. Now, when you have a little bit of stress, those stress hormones help you survive, help you deal with that. But when we experience danger, that immediate needs for survival, well, that's going to create, blood and oxygen, running from different parts of the body to the muscles to get ready. And a couple of things worth thinking about. Experience will result in how our brains are wired, with this. And those stress hormones, well, they help us deal with that immediate danger, that risk. They help us survive. But what happens when we live with a lot of stress, or we've had harsh things in our past? Well, that can create an implicit memory that means underneath the surface, that stress response can be triggered all the more quicker. Now, I did say I would give a simpler version of the brain, and I really like Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. Now, I'm going to give a try to explain this, and if you want to look up Dan Siegel on YouTube, feel free. Now, he uses a hand to describe the brain. Now, you have the spinal cord coming up, and then that brainstem, that where our big feelings are. Let's call that the downstairs brain. That's here. That's where our life functions are, our breathing, our heart rate, but it's also where our big feelings are. We have the amygdala right in the center of the brain. That will filter for danger. Now, what that does, our senses take information. The amygdala will filter for it. No danger, just goes into the memory. But if there is danger, that'll kick in those stress hormones, that cortisol, the adrenaline. Now, we also have the thinking part of the brain, the upstairs brain. Now, that has two sides, left and right. They do slightly different things, but usually it's our thinking that controls our emotion. But when those stress hormones hit, this is immediate need for survival, the thinking goes offline. Those stress hormones create that fight or flight, that immediate response. Now, that's a survival thing. If you're standing on the road and a big bus is barreling towards you, do you need to stop to think, oh, maybe I should get out of the way? No, your eyes will see that danger. You will jump. That's because those stress hormones help you survive. But in everyday stresses, those stress hormones can affect us. I hope that's helpful. If you like that hand model of the brain, have a look at Dan Siegel describing it. He has a couple of things on YouTube that are really helpful. Now, that amygdala, that's focused on immediate survival, not long-term. But, when we do experience, those stress hormones, we get ready to fight or flight, those active responses. But when they don't work, well, we can have more passive responses, and we can freeze or flop. And that's like a deer in a headlight. The active ones don't work. And in nature, this happens a lot with different animals. A cheetah goes out and catches an antelope, and that antelope will freeze. Cheetah turns, the antelope will then run off. Then it's natural, but human beings do that too. If your active responses don't work, that freeze can take over. Now, in the short term, those stress hormones help us. They help us survive those threatening situations. But when we have chronic stress or stress in our history, well, that means we have higher levels of cortisol running through the brain. And that increased cortisol, well, that's going to affect those electrical signals from different parts of the brain. That's going to regulate memory and emotions, and that lowers our ability to deal with stress. And what can happen with prolonged excessive stress, it can hardwire pathways. The way nerve cells, brain cells, communicate to each other, and particularly between the hippocampus, which is memory, and the amygdala. And that's going to mean we're We're more prone to that fight or flight. So, but it also has an ability to switch off the thinking part of the brain. Now, there's some good news with all this. In the brain, we have our gray matter. You hear that term, a fair bit, and the brain is packed with nerve cells. Now, the other thing we have is white matter. Now, white matter, they're the fibers, those pathways, the way the different parts of the brain connect and communicate to each other. Now, as we grow older, think about that white matter. Think about it as a, almost like you ever take your Christmas tree lights off and set them down? They look like a big web of wires. Well, that's the way they work in the brain. They will communicate to each other. But chronic stress, well, that's going to create certain more solid pathways. So that's why certain reactions seem automatic. It's habitual. Now, the good news with that, we used to think once those pathways are formed, we're stuck with them. Now we know, and they call it a plasticity of the brain. The brain can reshape itself. Neurons, those brain cells, neurons that fire together, wire together. So we do tend to, as human beings, have a negative bias. It's like we're drawn to the negative. We have Velcro for the bad. It sticks out a little bit more, and we have Teflon for the good. And that means change. And changing that, we can literally learn to rewire our brain, but that won't happen overnight. It'll happen with persistent effort on our part. But we can literally change the way our brains work. Now, with this, I did a second handout. Yes, I took what I heard from Zoe, how stress and trauma affect the brain, but I also took, let's do more than that. Let's look at ideas for healing. Now, we put the QR code up here. I hope this works for you. If you hold your camera up to it, it should open up for you. But if it doesn't, that doesn't work. It's on the resources section on the ASCERT's website. Now, in that, we talk about resilience. Now, with COVID, we hear this word a really lot. And there are some people that roll their eyes when we talk about resilience again. But resilience is really important. It's our ability, it's our capacity to rise above, to transcend adversity. And I like that definition because that's Robbie Gillen from University in Dublin. And go a bit further, the building blocks for resilience, what we know through years of research, 4 things: a stable person in your life, having a rock you can lean on, somebody who is stable that you can rely on. Now I'm going to jump to the last one, feeling involved and connected. Human beings, we're social creatures. We need people. So feeling involved, feeling you're part of something, that's a building block to resilience. Now, the 2 middle ones, equally important. Feeling you can overcome hardship and guide your destiny, that's important. That belief in your ability. Yeah, I can do this. And feeling equipped to manage your emotions and behavior. Yeah, things happen. It's not what happens. It's how I react to it. Now, the important thing to say about resilience, what we know is, and research has told us this, because COVID's been stressful right through, all of us worldwide, and it's been stressful, but the most significant thing that's helped people and their well-being is their sense of agency. Now, what does that mean? Now, agency is when all of us actively decide what's going to work for me, what's going to help me through this difficult situation, and have the confidence to do it. And agency, and I took this from Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. He talks about 3 things that are really important for that, to strengthen that agency in ourselves. Top of the pile, and any school of resilience puts this as key. That's self-efficacy, that belief you can do it. But also optimism, hope, a belief, if I do this, it's going to be helpful or help me through this. And then imagination, you can apply what you're doing in different areas and different goals that you want to accomplish. So agency, what you decide, and it works for you. It gets you through a difficult situation. You acknowledge it. Bit by bit, you're going to strengthen your belief in your ability. Now, in the ideas for healing, we talk about strategies that do help. If a stable person in your life is one of the building blocks to resilience, well, let's think about human beings. Now, human beings, just like relationships, we need water to survive. Now, it's a fact of being human. Now, if you're dying of thirst and you come across a puddle that's mucky and dirty but you're in a desert, you haven't had water in 2 days, you will drink that. Like human beings, we'll do the same with relationships. You'll take anything because we need them. You got to raise this as a question. Hope I'm not being critical, but how many times do unhealthy relationships or our relationship with things like alcohol and drugs or other behaviors that help us self-soothe, well, they might work in the short term for us. In the long term, no, they cause more problems so it raises a question, what are we doing that's going to fill our emotional reservoir? It's going to strengthen our resilience. Think about resilience as a reservoir. We're born with it. We have the capacity for it, but does life drain it out of us, or do we keep replenishing it, keep it full? And so think about this in your life. Who gives you positive messages? Who are people you can lean on? Now, other ideas we talk about in the handout, and again, you can download this from the ASCERT's website, how you look after yourself, self-care. That's going to be pretty important. And when it works for you, it's going to strengthen your agency. When things do happen, just don't automatically go into that fight or flight. Notice it. Get curious. Don't flop or freeze. Get curious. Try to learn how to turn that thinking part of the brain on. I'm going to talk about some ideas that help us do that. A really important thing, the way we talk to ourselves is really important. And if you have a tendency, and I meet a lot of people that are just overly self-critical. They're constantly calling themselves stupid or worthless or useless, and those messages that we're giving ourselves are just going to lower our belief in our ability. So in the handout, we talk about like having a poison parrot on your shoulders, always giving you those negative messages. Well, learn how to put the poison parrot to bed. And how do you put a parrot to bed? You put a blanket over it. And we do talk about laughter and physical activity because that can be helpful. But when I use this handout with people, this is telling us what to do. A little bit concerned about this. It's not really taking it that bit further, how to do it. So what we've done with ASCERT over the years, we put 2 further short clips, on the YouTube that you can download booklets from the description of the clips. First one we did was dealing with worry, because when COVID started, we were concerned about how all that stress and worry was going to affect people. But then we did another clip on self-care. How do we look after ourselves? What's going to work for us? And that's all based on science. It's not complete. This isn't everything up there, but there's ideas that we really do believe are helpful. Now, again, on that clip, there's a booklet you can download, Self-Care When I Need It Now. And if you have trouble finding these clips, just look up my name, Ed Sipler, on YouTube. Now, what's in that? Again, not a complete package of self-care, but very helpful things. Relaxed breathing. How do we use breathing? Now, we all breathe, but when you get stressed and those stress hormones kick in, your breathing becomes more rapid, shallow. We teach people how to slow that down. And relaxed breathing really helps us calm down. Self-compassion, that's how we can put that poison parrot to bed. Self-compassion is the way we talk to ourselves, crucially important. And then natural ways, so we have those stress hormones pumping, natural ways to build positive chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin. Dopamine's related to pleasure, oxytocin's about helping us feel safe and connected. Serotonin is going to regulate our mood, and endorphins, natural ways to build that. And the final thing in that clip, we talk about using positive emotions to deal with stress, because when we go out of our way to experience positive emotions, our brains produce dopamine. When you do that regularly and consistently, it will strengthen the dopamine pathways in the brain and the dopamine receptors. That's called the broaden build theory by Barbara Fredrickson. That helps us create what they call cognitive flexibility. When things happen, we have a broader outlook rather than zoom in on the negative. Over the years, I've found these skills really helpful, not just in the people I work with, but I have to say myself too. Now, If you're a parent or carer and you're working with your kids and helping them deal with their big feelings, we also put a booklet on the table, Building Our Children's Developing Brain. Now, to look at that, it's on a page stagger. So literally, not only can you download the booklet, but just like this, you can use clips that takes a viewer through the booklet. If you use that and there's an evaluation page attached to it, you can let us know, is that helpful? But that's aimed at parents to help their children with their big feelings. So the key things we've been talking about. The brain has a built-in alarm system that's designed to detect threat and keep us safe. It's functional. And when we are faced with threat, the emotional brain takes over. That fight or flight response or freeze takes over. And those triggers, they can be difficult to deal with. And that fight or flight response can be helpful to help us mobilize, but can often be misunderstood by other people. But I think the most important thing I'm saying, there are things you can do to strengthen you and your resilience. So a final thought. And one person said this to me after going through this material and we were talking it through. She said to me, when I look back, I always thought I was stupid. I thought there was something wrong with me. Looking at this work had made me feel I'm not stupid. And I've watched her over the years get her life back together. And it's been wonderful that what we talked about was helpful to do that. So a key message I'm borrowing from Paul Gilbert. He's done a lot of work on compassion. Your reaction to stress, it's not your fault. It's the way your brain's been wired. The way the brain works, well, there it is. And your experiences weren't your fault, but it's what you do with it. Now, however you respond, it's really important you bring as much warmth and compassion to your inner voice of what you tell yourself. And think about this, how you talk to a loved one, a child, even a pet. We talk to other people in a much more compassionate tone than we tend to talk to ourselves. So the tone we talk to ourselves is as important as the words. Now, taking all this in, again, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this clip. Important question, what did you hear today that made a difference? Does it point you to look at the other clips we have on worry, self-care? How could that build your agency? Your optimism, yeah, this work might help me. I got a better understanding of how my brain does work and how stress affects my nervous system. Now, the bigger question, what are you going to do with it? Now, that's your choice, your decision. It's not a quick fix. As I said in the very beginning, it's not a replace for professional help. At the same time, people have found this really helpful. There's other clips we have on YouTube. Like I said earlier, you want to find them, just type my name and Ed Sipler. Each of those clips has resources you can download from the description of the YouTube. So I really want to thank you for watching it, taking the time. I want to thank ASCERT for helping us put this out there for people. And I really do hope you found something in this clip today that helps you. Thanks very much.